What happens when a media-savvy royal crosses paths with a journalist who refuses to follow the script? You're about to see exactly that. Meghan Markle arrived on the Tamron Hall Show expecting a warm, polished conversation. Instead, she found herself under the glare of a relentless interview that pulled apart years of carefully crafted PR in real time. Last night's exchange left viewers stunned. This wasn't just an interview. It was a collision between two powerful women, one armed with a polished image, the other with pointed questions. Before we dive into the details of this unforgettable TV moment, make sure you hit subscribe and drop a comment, because you won't believe what happened when these two worlds collided. From the moment Meghan stepped onto the Tamron Hall set, the tension was almost tangible. She wore a sleek cream blazer that seemed to glow under the lights, her posture and smile radiating the grace of someone used to controlling a narrative. Yet, there was a subtle stiffness in her demeanor, the kind you only notice if you know what to look for. Tamron Hall, famous for her unflinching interview style, sat across from her guest with a noticeably thick stack of notes. This wasn't the kind of prep you bring for a standard promotional appearance. The cameras were set to capture every flicker of expression. "Meghan, thank you for joining us tonight," Tamron began, her voice a precise blend of warmth and steel. "I know you're here to talk about your latest partnerships with charitable organizations, but I think our viewers would appreciate some context on your recent public comments." Meghan's smile dimmed for the briefest second before returning to its perfect form. "Of course, Tamron. I'm always happy to discuss the important work we're doing to bring positive change to communities in need." But Tamron cut in before the rehearsed talking points could settle in. "I'm referring specifically to your remarks last month about media accountability and the role of journalists in telling complete stories. Some interpreted those as direct criticism of coverage you've received over the years. Could you clarify what you meant?" The question hung in the air. Meghan straightened her posture, drawing on her media training, and began speaking about the value of authenticity in storytelling. But Tamron's eyes made it clear. She wasn't satisfied with a vague, polished answer. "That's interesting," Tamron interjected smoothly. "Because when I look at the coverage in question, much of it comes from documented public records, court filings, and even statements from your own representatives. Are you suggesting that publishing verified information can be considered unfair?" Meghan's hands shifted in her lap, subtly twisting her wedding ring, a telltale sign of discomfort. "I think what's important to understand is that context matters. Without full context, stories can create narratives that aren't entirely accurate." "All right, let's talk about context," Tamron said, glancing down at her notes like a trial lawyer preparing her next move. "Over the past 3 years, your legal team has filed numerous lawsuits against media outlets for privacy violations and defamation. Many were withdrawn or settled privately without any admission of wrongdoing. If those reports were truly false, why not see the cases through and clear your name definitively?" The audience was silent. This was not the soft celebrity interview Meghan had clearly anticipated. Even the camera operators seemed to sense the gravity of what was unfolding, shifting to closer angles to catch every detail. Meghan's reply carried a noticeable tightness. "Legal strategies are complex, Tamron. Sometimes the emotional toll of prolonged litigation just isn't worth it, especially when my focus is on work that creates positive change for people who need it." Tamron didn't miss a beat. But wouldn't vindication help that work? If false reports were damaging your credibility, proving them wrong in court could strengthen your ability to do the humanitarian work you're advocating for. Meghan shifted in her seat, her perfectly trained composure showing small cracks. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complicated situation. In today's media climate, which thrives on conflict, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is rise above the noise." Tamron leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but unyielding. "I understand that perspective. But let's look at specifics. Last year, your spokesperson said a certain story about your interaction with palace staff was categorically false. Yet, when pressed for details about what exactly was false, no clarification was ever given. How do you expect the public to separate legitimate criticism from unfair attacks if your responses are vague?" Meghan's practiced smile was gone. Her voice sharpened. "I find it concerning that you're asking me to relitigate years of stories. That's not why I'm here, and frankly, it's not productive for anyone." Tamron's tone stayed even, but the intensity in her gaze deepened. "Actually, I think it is productive. When public figures make strong claims about media accountability, people deserve to know what that means in practice." She flipped a page in her notes. "In a recent interview, You spoke about your truth. That phrase has become something of a hallmark for you. But truth isn't subjective. Either an event happened or it didn't. When you say my truth, are you acknowledging that your version may differ from documented facts? Meghan's jaw tightened. I think you're playing word games. People's lived experiences are valid, regardless of how others choose to interpret or report them. But interpretation and reporting are not the same, Tamron countered. Reporting means documenting events as they occurred. If multiple independent sources confirm information that contradicts your public statements, how do you reconcile that? The studio was silent now. Even the faint rustle of the audience had stopped. Meghan's publicist shifted nervously in the front row, eyes darting toward the control booth. This is exactly the problem with media coverage, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. You reduce complex human experiences to courtroom-style interrogations. Tamron's brow lifted. Meghan, these are questions based on your own public statements and public records. If asking for clarity on inconsistencies feels like an ambush, what does that say about those statements? Meghan gripped the arms of her chair tightly, her knuckles pale under the studio lights. I came here to talk about the work I'm doing to help people, but you seem more interested in tabloid-style gotcha moments. Tamron's reply was smooth, but it cut like glass. All right then, let's talk about your foundation. Records show that nearly 60% of donations in its first year went to administrative costs, not direct aid. Can you explain why your overhead was more than double the recommended standard for nonprofits? The question landed like a grenade. Meghan's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out for a moment. When she did answer, the words stumbled. Those numbers, that's not, you're taking the reports out of context. Starting a foundation requires significant investment in infrastructure. You can't just hand out checks and call it charity work. Tamron nodded politely, but her tone didn't soften. Of course not. But 60% overhead is far above the industry benchmark of 25% recommended by the American Institute of Philanthropy. Which specific infrastructure costs justify more than double the standard? Meghan's breathing grew shallow, her eyes flicking toward her publicist like a silent plea for rescue. I'm not going to defend every financial decision to someone who clearly came in with an agenda to make me look bad. My only agenda, Tamron said, her voice now with a sharper edge, is to ask the questions journalists are obligated to ask when public figures solicit public trust and donations. If those questions are uncomfortable, maybe the issue isn't the questions. The air in the studio felt heavy. Meghan's image, so carefully managed over years of media appearances, was fraying before the cameras. This is exactly why media coverage can be toxic, Meghan fired back, her voice climbing. You're not interested in understanding the full picture. You're here to stir conflict for ratings. Tamron stayed composed. Asking a public figure to explain their public statements and financial records isn't toxic. It's journalism. The fact that you call it an attack might concern viewers about how open you really are to transparency. The audience sat frozen. Every camera angle captured Meghan's tightened jaw, the flush on her cheeks, the way her hands refused to stay still. Then, abruptly, Meghan stood. Her sudden movement startled even the crew. You know what? I don't have to sit here for this kind of hostile interrogation, disguised as an interview. Tamron remained seated, voice calm. Please sit down. Walking away from legitimate questions doesn't make them go away. It only raises more. Hide. Meghan's voice cracked, the royal composure gone. I'm not hiding. I'm refusing to participate in a character assassination masquerading as journalism. This is a hit job, Tamron, and I won't play along. From the front row, Meghan's publicist stood, signaling frantically toward the control room, clearly hoping to cut to commercial. Tamron's voice was still steady. A hit job would involve falsehoods or irrelevant attacks. I've only asked you to explain your own statements, clarify contradictions, and account for how donations are used. If that's character assassination, what does it say about your relationship with accountability? Stop it. Meghan snapped, jabbing a finger in Tamron's direction, the gesture sharp under the bright studio lights. Stop with your sanctimonious lecture about journalism. You blindsided me with financial reports, twisted my words, and created a hostile setup meant to make me look bad no matter what I say. Tamron finally stood, her posture calm but commanding. Meghan, the financials I referenced are public filings from your foundation. The quotes are from your own interviews and social media. Nothing has been twisted. I've simply asked you to explain them. Explain them to who? Meghan shot back, her voice rising enough to strain the microphones. To you? To an audience already primed by years of negative coverage? To a media system that profits from tearing down women, especially women of color, who challenge the establishment? Tamron's expression hardened, just slightly. Don't, she said, her tone low but carrying unmistakable warning. Don't try to use identity politics as a shield against fair questions. I've faced my share of discrimination in this industry, real barriers, real challenges, but I've never used that to avoid answering legitimate questions about my conduct. Meghan's cheeks burned crimson, her voice trembling with anger. How dare you lecture me about discrimination? You have no idea what I've endured, or what my family has gone through under relentless media persecution. Then explain it, Tamron said, leaning forward now. Give specific examples. Name the false stories. Provide evidence. That's accountability. That's transparency. The words hit the studio like a thrown gauntlet. Every person present seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Meghan's answer. But none came. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then stood frozen in place, eyes darting toward her publicist. This is insane, she finally said, the defiance now edged with defeat. I came here to talk about making a positive difference, and you've turned it into a trial. You came here as a public figure asking for public trust and money, Tamron countered firmly. The public has a right to know their support is justified. That's not persecution, it's accountability. Meghan took a step back toward the edge of the set. I'm done. Air whatever you want. Edit it to fit your narrative. But I won't participate in my own public execution. There's no editing in live television, Tamron reminded her, her voice cool as steel. What viewers are seeing is exactly what's happening. Your defensiveness, your refusal to give direct answers. That's not editing. That's reality. The words seemed to land like body blows. Meghan turned sharply toward her publicist, who was already at the edge of the set, ready to escort her away. We're leaving, she said, voice tight with anger. This interview is over. Tamron didn't flinch. You can leave the conversation, Meghan, but the questions will still be here tomorrow, and people will remember how you chose to respond tonight. That stopped Meghan mid-step. She pivoted back, her expression a volatile mix of fury and humiliation. You know what they'll remember, Tamron? They'll remember you ambushed a guest who came in good faith, that you cared more about sensationalism than substance, and that you proved exactly why the public doesn't trust mainstream media. What they'll remember, Tamron replied with finality, is that when asked to explain your own statements and how charitable funds were used, you chose to storm off rather than answer. That speaks louder than anything you can say about my journalism. Meghan's jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and strode toward the curtains, the sharp click of her heels echoing through the silent studio. Her publicist followed close behind, their retreat tracked by every camera in the room until they disappeared backstage. The studio was still. Then Tamron turned to face the main camera, her poise intact despite the chaos that had just played out. When we come back, she said, voice steady, we'll discuss media accountability and why asking tough questions matters, even when the answers are uncomfortable. Don't go anywhere. As the show cut to commercial, the room buzzed with hushed voices. The crew knew they had just witnessed something that would dominate headlines and social media for days. Tamron Hall had managed what few journalists could, cutting through years of polished public relations to confront the reality beneath. For Meghan Markle, the moment would linger far longer than the commercial break. What do you think? Was Tamron too harsh, or was this the accountability Meghan needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe so you never miss the moments that have everyone talking.